This video marks the start of a heroic tech help series. Here's the idea. If I see tech trouble online, I might try to solve the problem with one of these videos. Now, of course you might say, but Mike, heroes are brave. What's so brave about tech support? So I looked up the word hero with my handy widgets app. Greek mathematician. No, that's not me. A man distinguished by exceptional courage. That definition doesn't exactly fit here. Let's try the thesaurus. Hero. Ah, there you go. Defender, guardian. That kinda works. The goal of these videos is to protect you from technical issues. Knowledge is the superpower. Think about it. What's stronger than that? What if you had the power of infinite information? Anyway, I was reading the Tumult forums when I noticed that someone was having trouble with maps. There were a lot of layers, but it was hard to manage them all. The request was asking how to better manage the maps in Hype. This is where a code editor like Whisk is needed. We've been seeing this phrase a lot lately, learn to code. So let's do that. How would you manage map layers in pure HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? That's the topic for this video. But first, map images are necessary to complete this project. OpenStreetMap.org is a great website for getting map data. The website states that you are free to copy, distribute, transmit, and adapt their data, as long as you credit OpenStreetMap and its contributors. It's wonderful. That is a fine-looking map of the greater New York metro area. However, this is the Hero series of videos. We need maps with a bit more mystique. Quite frankly, and it's surprising to me that they do this, but the world map images used in this project are from the Central Intelligence Agency. That's right, the CIA. They produced the World Factbook, which is in the public domain. God bless the USA. The maps are gorgeous. There is one page in particular that is especially relevant to the maps. It's the CIA's site policy page. The copyright section states that unless a copyright is indicated, information on their website is in the public domain and may be reproduced, published, or otherwise used without their permission. They request only that the agency be cited as the source of the information and that any photo credits or bylines be similarly credited to the photographer or author or the agency as appropriate. So, to be clear, the world maps in this project, those are from the CIA. The cute cartoony flags are from OpenMoji. I'll put the links in the description. There's another part of the site policies page that's important to mention. It's in the use of the CIA seal section. That seal is not used anywhere in this video. Also, this video is not endorsed by the CIA. This video is not legal advice. Okay, now that we cleared that up, moving on. Even before one line of code is written, the ingredients are impressive. It uses a new code editor from Tumult. It uses visually stunning world maps from the CIA. And it uses adorable icons from OpenMoji. There is one other thing that I wanted to show you. Pixelmator Pro. Since these are 4K videos, I downloaded the PDF version of the maps. I then exported an image from that file at double the resolution. The result was a huge image. So I scaled it down to 4K with Pixelmator Pro's machine learning super resolution. The app states that this preserves sharpness and details. This feature throws a little sci-fi into the mix. And at the time this video was recorded, the app was on sale for $19.99. That's crazy cheap considering the quality of this app. We're ready to build our project now. We're not starting completely from scratch though. I'm just going to cut and paste the HTML code from the Phottix TV Web Number 1 video. Essentially, this is a blank HTML document. We can give it a proper title though. Layered Maps Example. Proper indeed. Whisk is great for live previewing, so let's give it something to show. Let's add those maps. For this project, the physical, political, and ocean maps are used. They all have that Robinson projection shape. It's a globe-like shape, and the outlines of the images perfectly align with one another. Since the images will be stacked, and we want the transitions to be smooth, it's necessary that all of the images are exactly the same size. But right now, the images are just displayed one after the other, so a little CSS fixes that right up. First, the images all get the map class. That's right, I use emoji as class names. It's valid. The point is that they all need the same value. It's critical to this project. Both the CSS and the JavaScript will rely on this name. Next, we can start adding some styling. First, add a pair of style tags in the header. Then let's start with styling the body tag. The margin is set to 0 as the map should fill the screen. Then the overflow is set to hidden. This removes the scroll bars. And since we're here, the font family is set to sans serif. Since there is no text on the page right now, this doesn't do anything. But when the controls are added, the labels will be easier to read. Now the map CSS class is added. It starts with a dot, as that's the selector. We want all of the elements with the map class to have the following styling. The position is set to absolute. This is probably one of the most important styles in the project, as this is how we layer our maps. The width is set to 100%, which helps to keep the whole picture in view. For niceness, you can set the height to auto, but that part isn't absolutely necessary. It's just to show you that the height will adjust automatically according to the width of the image. Right away you can see major changes on the page. With just a small amount of CSS, the layout changed dramatically. With only one image visible, this is when to add the controls. The idea is that the buttons will be used to change the visibility of the layers. Before the image elements, an HTML form is added. There are 3 radio inputs included in this form, one for each of the maps. That's physical, political, and ocean. Radio buttons allow only one option to be selected. That's why it's important to give all of the inputs the same name. This time I'm using the globe emoji. That puts the radio buttons together. See how only one button can be selected at a time? Make sure that the value attribute and the label corresponds to the ID name of the related image. They need to be the same so that the button presses align with the correct images. This is where a little complexity is added to the project. Let's say it's not enough to show a single image. What if we want to display additional data on the map, like flags? So a 4th input is needed. However, this input is a checkbox. That's for toggling on and off the display of flags. Creating a radio button or a checkbox is very similar, but don't make it too similar. The checkbox needs a unique name. Since it's the flags button, I'm going to give it a flag emoji. You can set a default radio button value by adding the checked attribute to a radio button. To keep things simple, for that initial page load, just rearrange the order of the map images to match. In other words, the first image to be shown on the page should be the last image loaded. Putting the physical map image tag last will make it appear on top of the stack of images. Does this make sense to you? Remember, if you find a particular part of the video to be confusing, you can ask questions in the comments. You get to be the hero by asking questions. I like friendly comments, and YouTube likes them too. If there's more discussion on a particular channel, that channel is more likely to be shown to others. So by you asking for help, others might find this helpful video too. Isn't that cool? That information is especially good to know for this next part. We're going to add some JavaScript. The first step is to add a pair of script tags. Then, since we want an action to occur when the input changes, we'll need a function and an event listener. First, we'll create the function. We can call this one update. It has an empty pair of parentheses, as no special parameters are needed here. The first job of the function is to store the image elements as an array. That's stored with the maps variable. The query selector all method works like CSS selectors. You can select all of the elements by class name, but don't forget the dot. Next is adding a loop. Included in the example are 2 ways to create it. The first way is with a traditional for loop. The alternative is using a for each loop. Personally, I like the old school approach, but I'm including both if you're interested in more modern code. In yet another video, I'm going to mention the caniuse.com website. Some people still need to support older browsers. So if IE 11 or lower is on your plate, you can get the job done with a for loop. The point is that the opacity is set to 0. Each map layer is hidden. You could also set the display to none, but opacity is used here to set up a cool transition. This is where it all fits together. Using the query selector method to fetch a single element, the input name globe checked selector grabs the first radio button in the document that is checked. Unlike before, where query selector all was used, there is only one expected result here. Only one layer can be shown at a time. So the query selector singular method is preferred. Once we know the selected map, the corresponding element can be made visible. In the example, this is accomplished by changing the opacity to 1. A value of 1 means 100% opacity. The image is completely visible. Now that we have a working function, we can add an event listener. Here we're listening for changes to values with input elements. This is a perfect match with how we want our map to work. Once an input button is pressed, run the update function. Just click the radio buttons to see it working. Yep, that's nice. However, we can make it a little better. Let's head back to CSS land. First, we're going to add the flag class to the map class. They'll both get the same styling. but now the transition property is added. Anytime the opacity value is altered, it should ease in and out for 1 second. Let's check that out. See, doesn't that look smoother? Next, we can make those buttons look better. The form has an ID of world type, so let's make that box more presentable. First, the position is changed to absolute, and we'll add a padding of 15 pixels. We don't want the text right against the edges. Oh, where did it go? Because the form element is earlier in the HTML than the image elements, the images are covering the form. No problem, a z-index value of 1 solves that. And since this box is using absolute positioning, we can align the box to the right with the right value of 0. Next, let's add a background color. I especially like the RGBA color space. That's because the alpha channel lets you control the opacity. Just a light background is enough to get the job done. A border radius of 30 pixels is added to the bottom left. This shape is less harsh, and the curve works with the shape of the globe. The buttons are a little small, and the text is squished together. We can change that by making the input buttons bigger. The input type radio and input type checkbox selectors are used to target the buttons. Then, the width and height are changed to 3 EM. The buttons are bigger, but now the alignment is goofy. Aligning HTML elements vertically centered used to be a nightmare. Now it's easy. Just set the display of the div elements to flex, and then align items to center. That's pretty much it for the CSS for this project. However, I did mention in the Tumult thread that I would discuss data attributes. So one last bit of CSS is added. It's data visible equals nope. If you're new to CSS, you might be wondering how the word nope applies to visibility. That's the beauty of data attributes. You create the names and the values. It always starts with data hyphen and then something. Here the word visible is the word that was chosen. The idea is if an element has an attribute of data visible with the value of nope, then its opacity is set to 0. It's another way to control visibility. At this point, I'm just giving you more options. The next 2 lines of JavaScript are an excellent example. Remember the loops from before? You had a choice of for or for each. Well, you don't need either of them. If you don't mind a little tedium, you can simply list the changes one by one. This can actually make sense when you're only working with 2 possibilities. Is it perfect programming? That's debatable. But if you're just starting out, this simplistic approach can be good enough to get you going. The point is this. In all 3 examples, the same end result is achieved. The opacity was set to 0. Here, it's accomplished by adding the data visible attribute with a value of nope to both flag images. Now, if you're really paying attention, you might have noticed something. Can you figure it out? We haven't actually added the flag images. For that part, let's take a quick look at Pixelmator Pro once again. The flag layers are the same size as the world map layers. They're transparent, so that the world map is not completely covered. The flags are grouped in a single image. That's for development speed and simplicity. However, each flag could be positioned individually. Back to the JavaScript, there are 2 things that we want to check. First, we want to know if the flag button is checked. If so, we want to know if the oceans map is selected. The oceans map shows the world differently than the other 2 maps, which means the countries are in different locations. The flags need to be moved. To keep things simple, one flag's image is for the oceans map, the other image is for the other 2 world maps. If there is a match, the value of data visible is set to yup, which makes that flag image visible. This particular example is a little silly, but the general idea is quite useful. You can add or remove classes with JavaScript. You can use data attributes in Hype too, if you splurge for the Pro version. It's one of those less glamorous features, but is quite useful if you know what you're doing. And there it is. In less than 115 lines of code, an impressive web map was created. I'll put a link in the description to the source code. It's an article on Phottix.com. This video is related to web design and web development. However, that's not the only possible topic for this series. Phottix TV is about tech, so that creates a wide range of possible help topics. I'll be watching. Hopefully, you'll be watching too.